3 ballets, 1 night. It doesn't get better than that. Houston Ballet is pleased to present Premieres, world-class dance by 3 of the most recognized choreographers working today. Houston Premieres by Azure Barton and Yuri Killian. A world premiere by Justin Peck. This is ballet at its very best. For tickets, visit houstonballet.org or call 713-227-ARTS.
Yes, do clap, because this is an exciting program. Good evening, everybody. My name's Jennifer Summers. I'm the Director of Education and Community Engagement, and I can see the look on your faces. You're just as excited as I am about tonight. So go ahead and take this moment to silence all your noise-making devices. And a reminder that if you need to exit during, lots of phones going up, thank you. On either side of the seats, you can exit and re-enter as needed. And I would say that without further ado, I'm about to welcome to the stage 2 of the most important ballet choreographers of our day, our own artistic director, Stanton Welch. And the choreographer of our next world premiere, Justin Peck.
Thank you. So thank you all for coming. Justin's just come from upstairs where he's been rehearsing his ballet today after not seeing it for a stretch of time. So I'm sure he's got lots to talk about. But before we get to the ballet, let's go back and learn a little bit about Justin and about his early career. So could you tell us where you were born and raised, and how did you find ballet, or did ballet find you?
Good question. Is this on? Here we go. That's a good question. I was born in actually Washington, D.C., and I moved super young to San Diego, California, and I grew up there. My family was from New York City, so they grew up and spent a lot of their young adult lives in New York, and so every summer they would take my sister and I on a trip to New York, and we would see a ton of theater and eat at a bunch of good restaurants, and it actually was a really sort of, it was a time that really formed me, I think. And it was a time that I always looked forward to as a kid to get to experience. And it was my first exposure to dance on stage. And, I started to see things at a really young age. I was like 8 or 9 years old, and I would usually fall asleep by the second act. But it was enough to really influence me and to spark a curiosity and an interest in dance. And the show that really led me to take the leap was a show called Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk, which is a rhythm tap kind of hoofing musical that Savion Glover developed. And so I started in that world and kind of found my way to ballet over time. But it took a little while. I mean, it really took actually getting to see a performance of American Ballet Theater who happened to be on tour in San Diego when I was 13. And I don't think they've been back since then. It was like a really random, it was like a 1-week special engagement thing. And I saw them do Giselle, and it's just like the memory of those performances is really ingrained in me. I remember seeing, Julie Kent and Ethan Stiefel and Herman Cornejo when he was like in the core and just starting to come up, and now he's a big leading star of ABT, and that sort of shifted my gears, and I started to really focus on ballet at that point. But San Diego's not a big dance town, so it was hard to get the exposure to that kind of level of dance, and so that was a really it's one of those like crucial moments that you look back on and you think like, if that hadn't happened, I don't think I would have found my way to this art form or to this specific wing of the art form. which is ballet. So.
But you learnt tap and jazz and
Yeah.
singing, dancing, everything.
I was
before.
really resistant to ballet. It felt like, it was too disciplined, too many rules. You had to wear tights, and, as a young boy, it just was.
Bad, tights are
Yeah,
bad.
so it took, I think I really had to see some strong role models of male dancers who were just showing themselves as being these great athletes and artists on stage. And that's why seeing ABT for me was so important, was because I'd never seen that as a young person until they came into town. And it really was an inspiring moment. So, but yeah, it's like people really tried to get me into those ballet classes as, being like a young tap dancer, and in the jazz classes and all that. And I was doing a lot of theater when I was a kid growing up too, but I was very resistant for a while.
And so then when was the move to New York? When did that?
Yeah, so then as soon as I finished that week of seeing ABT in performance, I just like poured myself into training as a ballet dancer. And so I enrolled at this school called California Ballet, and I just started taking classes every day, and I had so much catching up to do. And I think because I was a boy, and especially in Southern California, there was such a lack of boys who were training in ballet, and so they took a special interest in me, and they helped me a lot along the way. And so eventually, over time, I started to improve, and I just started to go to summer programs, these summer intensives, and I knew I wanted to get to New York somehow. And the School of American Ballet, I didn't know a whole lot about Balanchine at that point, but I knew that the School of American Ballet was in New York, and that they had kind of like a boarding school, a dormitory, and a good program set up where students can come there and train. And so I didn't get in the first year I auditioned to the summer program, and then the second year I was accepted into
How old were you?
Well, I was 14 when I auditioned the first time, so I wasn't quite at the level yet. And then the second time I was 15, and I got in just barely at like the intermediate, like base bottom level. And that was a great moment, because then all of a sudden I was in a class with 25 other guys, and before, back in Southern California, it was just like me, and it was kind of like the whole Billy Elliot. To give you some imagery, it was that sort of like me and then like 20 girls like at the bar, and so I was really excited about that, and then at the end of the summer program, I was invited to stay for the year term, which was like a dream come true. And I remember calling my parents and just being like, I'm going. No, it was a long conversation. It was like a lot of back and forth, and it was a hard decision to make, because, as a parent, you feel kind of gypped out of a couple of years if your kid goes
You're 16
away.
at this point?
It was like right before I turned 16. Yeah, so then I came to New York, and I was at the School of American Ballet for 3 years before joining New York City Ballet.
Right. And then you joined the company, and how long have you danced for with it?
I think it's been 13 years now since I just thought about that, because I'm about to step off the dancer roster. So I was like, how long have I been here? I didn't really even like think about it, but it's been 13 years. Yeah, I was an apprentice, and then I was in the Corps de Ballet for a number of years, and now I'm a soloist dancer there.
It's hard to juggle the two.
Yeah.
Eventually
yeah.
one takes over.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny. I remember having a conversation with Peter Bowl, maybe like 5 years ago, and he was like, "You're gonna have to stop dancing like right away." And I was like, "No, I'm not. I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna keep going." And I did. I felt like I definitely like made an effort to stay present as a dancer, and I felt like there was still a lot that I needed to learn from being inside of the other works. especially the works of Balanchine and Robbins, and getting to work with other choreographers. And so I wanted to have that kind of experience before it was time to step away. And so it feels like sort of the right time for me right now.
Do you have a favorite role that you love to dance? Or
Oh, it's actually interesting you say that, because they just did the Robbins program here, and one of my favorites is I actually get to dance a pas de deux in the cage. Yeah, okay, they like it. They like that piece. Yeah, no, it's that ballet is so radical, and it's just amazing how it was made in, like, I think it was the early 50s, and it still feels like this really relevant piece and striking piece. And so I've gotten to dance that a bit at City Ballet. I'm trying to think other favorite roles. Yeah, I really liked doing a lot of the Robbins work. I remember they cast me to do Concerto Barocco a lot. And that always felt kind of thankless to me. Like, it was like, it's this beautiful central pas de deux in the middle, but it's so hard, and it's so hard on the man's back, and it doesn't get easier. It's like you try and train to get stronger and stronger in it, and it doesn't really matter. It's like, it's always hard, and it's always like slightly painful, but it's such a beautiful piece. So it's, of course, it's like an honor to be a part of, but it's like you start to develop relationships with the ballets and memories with these ballets. And Firebird is another piece I love dancing, because the prince is sort of like this, is a protagonist, and so I loved getting a chance to tell the story from beginning
and
to end.
Music too.
Yeah,
So
and we do a version that was created by Balanchine, and he incorporated the original Chagall sets, which are just so gorgeous, and the costumes are all there. And so I always felt like the costume I wish we had a photo of it that we could show, because he kind of looks like a young Santa Claus before he got kind of like overweight and a big beard. Like, it's just sort of, it's like that's what he's wearing in it. But it's kind of cool.
So now let's reverse a little bit and talk about creation.
Yeah.
So in all that, was creation always a part of it? Were you making tap and jazz and plays, and was it always a driving force, or was there a trigger at some point that you found interest in that?
Yeah, I do remember kind of choreographing a lot of my own tap and kind of theater dance stuff that I did when I was growing up, but it wasn't something that I was like, oh, I really want to do this. It really didn't hit me until I came to New York and I started to become exposed to mainly the works by George Balanchine and Jerome Robbins. And I think the fact that, they showed me that a piece could be about the interrelation between music and movement, and it could be just about that, and there's so much to that. And so that was an aha moment for me, where I was like, this is a whole new, different thing, because before that point, I had only really seen narrative work. So, and when I saw ABT, it's like that was Giselle, and so I developed this kind of intense hunger to see as much of the New York City Ballet repertoire as I could. And luckily, through the school, they have a program where they offer complimentary tickets to the students, and so I would just go every night, and I would sit all different spots in the theater. Usually it was like the nosebleeds, because they're tickets for the students, and so I would be in the third ring, fourth ring, and so I felt like I got to study a lot of the works from above, and that always really interested me, like especially what Balanchine did with structure. And but then there were also moments where I would kind of look down and find the one empty seat in the front row, and I would just run down at intermission and sneak in there and get to see Nikolai Hube sweat as he was dancing Stravinsky Violin Concerto, and he had just taught me in the class that morning. So it was this really cool experience about getting to know the dancers and getting to know the ballets, and having that influence me over the course of 3 years, not really thinking that I wanted to choreograph just yet, but then when I joined New York City Ballet as an apprentice, I started to think about it more seriously, and I thought about it for a while, and it wasn't until I was actually going part-time to school while I was dancing early on. Columbia University has a program called General Studies where you can take classes in the mornings, and so I was doing that, and one of the semesters, for kicks, I decided to take dance criticism, and I was like, let's see what this is like from this point of view. And I loved the course, and I remember doing like this whole presentation comparing the styles of Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire, and I had a great professor named Mindy Aloff, and at the end of the semester, she told me that she felt like I might have an interesting mind for choreography and that I should think about trying it. And up until that point for a few years, I had been thinking about it, so it felt like this omen to just take the plunge and see what happens. And so right after that, so that was like another kind of pivotal moment for me, and I feel so indebted to her, and I always like to talk about her in that moment, and I'm still in touch with her, and we get together every now and then, and so that feels very special to me. But yeah, so I made my first piece for like a student-run organization at Columbia, and it was a duet for two dancers from New York City Ballet. One of them was enrolled in the General Studies program as well, and so we got to spend some time creating this short, small piece, and it was so hard. I remember thinking, like, this is so difficult. I don't know how people do this, and then after I went through the process of making that piece and it premiered, I had a moment where I was like, do I want to keep doing this? And then I immediately was like, yeah, I think I need to like try again. And so I made another ballet for the New York Choreographic Institute, which is like an affiliate of New York City Ballet. It's like a laboratory where kind of aspiring and up-and-coming choreographers can go and work with dancers and have studio space for 2 weeks. And
Professional dancers, though.
professional dancers, and get to just spend a couple weeks going through the process of making something, and then the showing's very informal. So I went on to do that, and I kind of have just been always making something since that point. And that was, I want to say that was 2009, so it's been 10 years.
Oh,
yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So that brings us up to where we are now, which is the new work that you're making for us upstairs, which now has a title. Do you want to
Yes.
talk about that?
Sure. It's always the hardest part is naming a ballet, I find, because I don't like the idea of viewers creating their own
Preconception.
yeah, and their own like outlook of a piece from reading a title. It's like, I wish you could just not title it anything or tell the audience after the fact, be like, oh, by the way, it was called this, so that you can just have you can just experience it for what it is and not have to associate it with anything.
Like a painting.
Yeah, like a
Untitled.
painting. And sometimes, as a choreographer, you can luck out and just be able to title a dance like what the music was called, and sometimes you have to call it, come up with something. And for this, I felt like, actually recently I've been feeling like I want to create titles that are as simple as possible, and that don't spell things out too much. And so we called this piece Reflections, and it's a piece, it's a commissioned score, so it's a score written by a composer, and he also writes he writes songs as well, and his name is Sufjan Stevens, and he wrote this piece for 2 pianos, and so we're actually, in terms of the visual for the piece, it's going to be a very clean white palette, and we're just going to see these 2 grand pianos back to back. And there's something about the symmetry and the balance of that image that really influenced the choreography. There's a lot of ideas that have to do with duality and mirror images and also asymmetry. I mean, I felt like I purposefully wanted to use an odd number of dancers to kind of as one of the parameters to help shape this piece. And so we have 11 dancers performing in the work. And so, yeah, that's where the title came from. I don't want to say like more about it because you have to just come see it.
And you said the cast was 11.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about picking the cast? What is that process like for you, and how much do they then influence what you do?
Yeah. So, well, the process was relatively straightforward because I was able to come and work on an existing piece here a couple seasons back, which was a ballet called You're the Rabbit. And that was... Same composer. And that was actually the first major work I created for New York City Ballet. But I got to work with the company here on that existing ballet, and we tailored it a little bit to the dancers here, and we tweaked it, and we got to explore the piece in collaboration with the dancers. But I really got to know the company through that process, and so it was very helpful for understanding how the dancers work generally, and also in relation to my own choreography. And so there's some new people in the room as well, but for the most part, I wanted to kind of continue to develop those relationships with a lot of those dancers. And this company is truly amazing. I don't know if you guys have seen other companies around the country, but I've gotten to travel and work with a lot of them. And when I came here, I was sort of like, whoa, like there's some sort of level that exists here that is just sort of like across the board with the dancer roster. And there's a certain kind of like focus and responsibility and like maturity that the dancers have here that doesn't exist everywhere else. And so I was kind of blown away with that at first. And yeah. And so I, through the process of working with them, I was able to like hone in on who these dancers are as artists and as human beings, and get a deeper sense of them in a way that if I had just come and created a new work, it would have been much more like surface level. I would have just watched a class and I would have been like, okay, that dancer has nice feet or whatever, and so this feels much more, just much more substantial. And so I always feel like I don't create ballets for companies, I create ballets for dancers. And so through that process, I feel like I've been able to do that for this new work. And so we have 11 very distinctive artists and personalities that go through an experience on stage together from when the curtain comes up to when it ends. And I think it's a little over 30 minutes long. And you'll see how it kind of ebbs and flows, and how there's different groupings and different couplings and different dynamics that start to arise between the dancers throughout the piece. So I think if you guys come to see Houston Ballet regularly, you'll hopefully get a lot out of seeing these dancers within this work.
And they definitely really dance. I love the fact that you need to be not just smart and musical, but also really on top of your classical technique, and that you played with that, and it's challenging as well as fulfilling.
Yeah, I mean they're such they have such great technique, and they're such classicists in a way that is especially with the classical technique, I think it's in a way that's beyond what I usually experience when I'm working at New York City Ballet, and so I felt really inspired by that, and I wanted to go further in that direction. And they're, they really are quite smart, and so so the way that we create a distinct vocabulary or a unique way of moving is by honing in on very specific details and very specific tweaks of the classical technique. So, and it takes a really refined way of dancing and a very smart way of dancing in order to pull that off. I've had experiences where I've tried to do that other places, and there's dancers who just can't seem to understand like the nuance of that. Like sometimes dancers will it'll either be like full-on classical or like full-on contemporary, and there's not a lot in between. And so there
nuance and phrasing and playing with the note and then you do that choreographically in response to them.
So and it gets to a point also where the work kind of becomes theirs, and so I feel like they've become such experts at like executing in that way, and that's come from the process of working together in the studio. So I'm really excited for the piece.
And then can you talk a little bit about the costuming? How did you come up with that, and who is your collaborator with?
I'm working with a designer named Ellen Warren, and she's really just known for making very simple, stripped down, kind of balletic leotards and tights, and I want. I didn't know there were images. I saw everyone looking up. Okay, cool. I got to check in every once in a while with what's going on up here. So they're almost like nothing, but we spent a lot of time honing in on like the color palette and how the specific dancers will correspond and relate or not with each other. And so it's about kind of creating a mood and creating like an energy on stage, and not so much going. It's not like a more is more situation where we're creating like this full-blown costume effect. It's gonna be a very distilled down ballet that, going back to what I was talking about, where I first was exposed to the works of Balanchine and Robbins and being very inspired by the interrelation between music and movement. I'm trying to create a world where the experience is about that. And so that's what we're trying to achieve here with the designs. And we also have a lighting designer named Brandon Sterling Baker who will work on this, and he's become sort of a long-term collaborator for me. I mean, we kind of got our start together 10 years ago, and we've worked numerous times on projects, and there we go, new slide. So this was we did a presentation at the Guggenheim in New York City a few weeks ago. So it was fun to show some of the work of this new piece out there. So, yeah. Anyway.
And of course, we open it in a week and a half now. So you have tomorrow, and then you go away, and then you come back.
Yes.
So what is the final process for you now? Do you like to run it a lot, just often for them to get to a point? Or are you still changing things? Or
right now we're making some changes. I changed kind of a big chunk of one of the paradas today. I think the dancers are here somewhere. They're probably going over it in their heads. No, it's I actually feel like there are choreographers who will change things up until the last minute, and then it'll like bleed over, and they'll continue to change things even after the premiere. I don't usually work that way. I feel like there's sort of like there's like a moment where you just sort of know it's finished, and that can happen the day of, or it can happen 3 weeks before, or anywhere in between. But it's that thing where you know and you know, and right now we're changing a few things, but I don't think it's going to change too much between now and the premiere. So right now I feel like, and I said this to the dancers earlier, I was like, I'm here to serve you. So it's like, it's kind of like, I want to sort of guide them from studio on the stage and how to navigate through like the lighting effects and the costumes and spacing and the live musicians and kind of thinking on a more like macro scale and finding the best way to bring everything together for this this singular experience. So that's where my focus will go. It's so interesting, like being a choreographer in the ballet world, because you have to be a choreographer, but also sort of like a director, in that you start with the choreography in the studio and you can get really specific, like, is this step on count number 2 or count number 3, and is it 45 degrees or is it 60 degrees? And so it can be super specific, and then once you have the groundwork for all that, then all of a sudden you have to step back and start to work with the lighting designers and the costume designers and the production team and set designers, if that applies, and the orchestra and the conductor, and it's about like bringing everything together later on. And so that took a while to figure out how to do, and it's the type of thing that you kind of have to just like do it to get that experience. Yeah, so there's like a learning curve with that too.
Perfect segue there, because you've just recently been working in other fields outside of dance, musical theatre with Carousel or film. Is the process different, or are there real similarities? Do you find, can you explain?
Yeah, I mean, I find them to be quite different. One of the major differences with working on Broadway versus working like in a ballet company is the amount of preparation and just like the hours and hours and hours poured into to getting the musical ready, and there's a bit more of like a more intense collective energy for the project to succeed, because everyone is there to like devote their entire like selves to it, and that's like their career in that moment, and that's their work, and that's their artistry, and so the company becomes very tight, and then it's sort of sad when the show closes because everyone disperses and goes their separate ways. We had 6 weeks of previews for Carousel on Broadway, so I watched probably about 50 performances of it, and we would all sit together sometimes for a couple hours after a show every night and talk about how we wanted to tweak it. Sometimes they would, the producers would be like, you have to put in a completely new number for this one song in 24 hours, so figure it out. And so it can be very high pressure, but also there's like a nice cushion of time to like figure it out. And I feel like it's a little too long of a amount of time, whereas like in the ballet, I almost wish that there were 3 or 4 preview performances for a ballet, so that you could get a sense of how it lives in front of an audience, because that's just something none of us experience, and so until the opening night, and then that's what it is, and the energy is always a bit frenetic because it's the first time both sides are seeing one another. And I just had a premiere in New York City a few weeks ago, and we were teching it to the very last minute, and I ended up cutting the backdrop 48 hours before the show, and so we had to like relight it all, and so it was just the type of thing where like the paint was still wet when the curtain came up, and it's like it really did take 3 or 4 shows before, and it was new music again, so it was like the orchestra and the dancers, by the 4th show they were like, okay, we kind of get it, we kind of get what this is, but yeah. And then film is a whole different beast, and I'm working right now on a remake of Westside Story with Steven Spielberg, who's directing it, and it's just a massive operation and a huge budget and so much preparation. It has to be like everything has to be like super specific and laser focused in order to execute it, and it just requires like a massive village to pull it off. And I'm still sort of like figuring it out as we go. Right now we're rehearsing for it in New York, and I was like, I have to take 2 weeks off to go to Houston though. So that was like the one thing in my contract. So I'm here now, which is good.
We don't mind sharing you with Spielberg.
So.
Well, great. Well, I want to, before we run out of time, to get a chance to ask or see if there are people who would like to ask some questions of Justin. So, yep, I feel like we're, yes.
Yeah, so she's asking how a choreographer or how I use the dancer's artistry to influence and create a ballet. That's a good question. Sometimes you'll look at a dancer and you'll say, that dancer has these amazing strengths. Maybe it's their speed of movement, maybe it's their line or their extension, and you'll want to harness that and use it to the advantage of the work that's being created, or even like push them further in that direction. That's sort of, I mean, there was a ballet I created, actually there's a documentary called Ballet 422 where I was working with Tyler Peck, who's no relation, but who's a principal dancer in New York City Ballet, and she's just one of the speediest, most precise dancers, and I wanted to see how much further I could go with her in that way and how I could challenge her in that way. And so sometimes it can be that type of thing. Sometimes, especially if you get to work with dancers over a long period of time, like Stanton does here, or in New York, I'm in residence at New York City Ballet, so I get to work with those dancers pretty consistently, and I will want to challenge their weaknesses and also see them in a different light, or see them like in a different sort of way. And so it can be about that too. And you know, a lot of times with casting ballets, I'll listen to the music and then I'll start to see specific dancers, like just dancing to that particular part of the music, and that influences like wanting to work with them, and I find the best dancers to work with are the ones who, because when you're making a ballet, you don't really know what it is, so you're kind of like, there's some trial and error. It's sort of like you're blazing a trail and you don't know where it's going, and so the best dancers to work with are the ones who can take an idea and like run with it, or be like, what if we do that but kind of like this, and then they'll turn it into some kind of shape. And that to me is the most exciting. And it's hard to, as a dancer, I think, to figure out how to do that, because the training of dancers, it's such a strive for perfection for ballet as an art form. And so there is this kind of like, it's kind of like constant self-doubt that you're not doing everything like perfectly. So I don't know. I always try and just like encourage the dancers to step away from that and not try and think about doing something perfectly, but to try and think about doing a step like in any sort of way. And I don't know if that answers your question, but I could probably talk about that for like an hour.
I think the fact that some of them choreograph themselves too, or they have exposure to that, they become aware of that, you need to like have a tennis match of information back and forth. You have to
Totally.
volley the ball.
Yeah,
Back and forth.
yeah, but and also every choreographer works differently. So some choreographers come in with everything planned out, and then some come in with nothing planned out, and they're like, "Well, why don't you just like improvise for a while?" And I'll tell you, I like that step, you know. So like, and that's valid too. I mean, so every process is a little different.
And do you feel it's different then between making something that is more about step and story, that there was a different approach?
Yeah. Well, with story, I mean, the story is a priority, I think. That's the first priority, is telling the story and carrying a viewer through that narrative. And so any sort of sequence or any sort of step must always be like questioned in relation to that. Yeah. So it's challenging. I think it's in a way, I find that there's more freedom to creating abstract work because
No
you don't
rule.
have that. Yeah. So
Sorry, yeah.
sure. Yes. Yeah, it's very true.
So you're an artist starting with a blank canvas. This is a commissioned piece of music. How closely do you, well, when you conceive what that music means to you, and it's when you said felt like reflections, do you work with the composer to find out what he intended, or do you go with the emotion that that music sent to you?
Definitely both. So she asked, like, does the composer influence like what a piece is, what you title a piece, or does that come from the process of working in a studio as a choreographer, like what the choreography ends up being and what that experience ends up being? Is that what influences the title? And I think it's both. For me, it's especially working with Sufjan. It's like we've worked pretty regularly together over the years now, and so there's always a constant conversation especially about what to name it, and he'll send like he's great with words, so he sends a lot of ideas, and we'll have a lot of back and forth about that, but usually, you know, I usually get final say over over him, and so you know, there's a little bit of like that kind of healthy argument that takes place, and so yeah, it's really a combination of the two, and sometimes, you know, he can even influence the choreography. Sometimes he'll come in and look at a rehearsal and have thoughts and send like 12 pages of notes or something. So, but it's fun to work with someone in that kind of collaborative way.
And it's ultimately the Everests, you know, to come here and make a new ballet and bring new music and design and everything. That's the highest mountains you can climb.
Yeah, and it's a real privilege to get to do that and to have that kind of like support to do that, because it's not something that happens too often, because, you know, it's expensive too, and it's risky to support that kind of work. So thank you, Stanton.
I saw another question. Yeah.
How do you notate these dances so that 50 years from now we can do a retrospect for you? Like,
Yeah, well, notating. She asked how do we notate the works, and there's not really a great system to notate dance in the way that you can notate music with sheet music, and so it's really an art form that is passed from generation to generation, and it's kind of cool that it's one of the few art forms that exists in that way, where it's like, you know, one word to the next word to the next word, and luckily nowadays we have very accessible ways of making, you know, video recordings of the work, and I'm constantly using my my iPhone to record rehearsals, and I'll look at them through the process of making them. I'll go home and like study them and kind of figure out what changes I want to make, and you know, Houston also has like a really great system of, you know, they have this like people use GoPros now, so that in the studio, GoPros are like these cameras that have sort of like a fisheye lens, so you can capture like the entire studio, even though you're kind of stuck at the front there. So yeah, there's a lot of that kind of documenting, and then there's ballet masters who take care of the work, and they have their own way of notating and creating their sets of notes, and so that's sort of how it's done. It's like it's a little bit elusive, I guess.
And kind of tribal in a way, I feel like. JP was here for Robin's setting Fancy Free, and he had his book of notes that he's written and added to for, what, 30 years maybe, setting that ballet. He gave it to Amy. Amy keeps it. She adds her own little notes, and it just is this, we call them the Bibles of the ballet, that you keep adding all the information in. It's wonderful that way to see his drawings and his notes.
Yeah, it's great.
I'm sure Barbara has tons of drawings of your
she's
ballet
great with that,
upstairs.
yeah.
Yes.
So, go ahead. Go for it. Okay. So you're no longer going to be dancing?
I am going to be dancing a bit. I'm going to be dancing very, very specifically, like project to project. I'm still interested in exploring. I always feel like a dancer first, so I'm interested in exploring dancing further in my own work. You know, I did it for the first time at New York City Ballet a couple of years ago in a ballet called The Times Are Racing, and I really loved that experience and sort of getting to be like on stage with my cast, and it was a very unique dynamic of being a dancer and also like the choreographer and sort of like I don't know, like kind of guiding them through it as we all danced it together. So I want to do more of that. At New York City Ballet?
Yeah.
Done with New York City Ballet?
I mean, like as a dancer, I know you're still.
I might get out there. I mean, it really depends. It's going to be like very, very specific. But for now, there's no like plans to.
Concerto Barocco.
The thing is, not Concerto Barocco, no. I mean, I'm 31 years old now, so I can, you know, I still have a couple years left to dance. But the truth is, it's just kind of scheduling-wise, it's just become too hard to be present for rehearsals and stuff, and so it's just kind of time to like not be full-time there in that way. So yeah, right there. I'm sorry. How do the dancers recognize me?
When he comes in, we tell them who he is. And then he's all over social media. So if you type on his name in, you'll get thousands of images. So they all know everybody in the ballet world.
And if they don't, I try to introduce myself and just say hello. So.
Yeah, Jimmy.
You've got a new ballet created on a cast. You've got probably more than one cast. How does that work? How does the ballet translate to an additional cast?
Yeah, well, I was saying earlier that the dancers are incredibly focused here, and so it makes it really easy to work with multiple casts because they really know their stuff. And so, like today in rehearsal, we were like, okay, you know, we have 10 extra minutes. Let's look at the second group, and they came forward and they just were able to dance it. And sometimes we make slight adjustments for other casts, if, you know, because they're different dancers, so they might influence it in different ways, or there might be, you know, maybe they'll make a mistake and that'll turn into something that's like more ideal, and so there's that kind of dynamic as well. So yeah, it's great here.
You recently had a ballet where you had the lead character change sex. And that's pretty unusual. Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean,
Not during
it
the
is,
ballet,
yeah.
meaning from one night to another night, it was
Yeah.
a man or a woman.
So that was a piece I created called "The Times Are Racing," which I danced in, and it's actually a sneaker ballet. So it's 20 dancers, and they wear sneakers in it as opposed to pointe shoes, and ballet shoes, and the central protagonist was originally created on a dancer named Robert Fairchild, who I kind of grew up with in the school. And there's a section where he actually does a little bit of tap dance in it. And so I was looking for dancers who could do that in the company. And there was this one female dancer, female soloist named Ashley Isaacs, and she is incredible at that kind of movement. And so I didn't even think about it that much. It was just like, you should learn this and perform this role. And so the next season she stepped into it and she danced it, and not a step of it was changed, and she kind of killed it. And it's sort of like her role now. Like she's she's taken over, and so that was really kind of cool to see that. And then we've been toying around with the central pas de deux in the piece, which was originally male-female. So we've done a cast that's male-male to kind of explore what that's like. And it's a ballet that lends itself really well to that kind of exploration, and because it keeps returning to our repertoire, we're able to try out different things and see how far we can push it. And it's really interesting to see how the piece changes in that way.
Yeah, so did you then, when you watch it, you have a different reaction when it's a man or a woman? Like, did you feel it told a different story, or was it the same?
Well, I think I was honestly, when I put in the male-male couple into the piece, I was just really interested in seeing what that would do to the choreography. And I was physically, and we changed it a little bit so that they kind of like alternated who was doing more of the lifting and vice versa. And so it kind of became like its own thing. And then I remember talking to the two men who dance it, and they're both openly gay men, and it was actually quite moving because they told me that they never performed a ballet where they felt like they could really be themselves and sort of like fall in love with another man on stage and have the chance to do that. And so it turned into this like kind of mini movement, and a lot of people came to see it in New York. And I remember there was like, a lot of us were like in tears at the end, because the audience they just like welcomed it with open arms, and they responded to it audibly. And so it's the type of thing that could only really come from, it was just like a lot of things that aligned for that to happen. And so it's a special thing. And so we've been doing we've allowed for them to, we just came back this last winter season. And so they've done a few more performances, and Ashley's been in there dancing the main role. And so it's kind of a flexible dance in that sense.
And yes, up the back.
She asked how my early stages with tap and jazz has influenced my choreography nowadays. And that's actually a really good question, because I didn't realize how much it influenced me until this last year or two, I started to think about it. And I feel like there is a very specific musicality that I have that was really developed through the training and the technique of tap dance, because it can be so subdivided and so like meticulously rhythmic, because you're sort of exposed, every movement has an audible sound to it, and that must correspond and relate to the timing and the rhythm of the music. And so that's really like, it was a huge moment where it trained my ear as a dancer and has found its way to influencing my choreography, and just how I hear music in general, I think. So that's kind of the broader answer, I think. I mean, there's been moments where I've actually included, like in this piece I'm talking about, The Times Are Racing, there's a couple key moments where there is actual tap dance that we put into the ballet, and that piece was really unique in that it was, I was trying to kind of explore like a crossroads of many different dance styles, and so it had a strong balletic backbone to it and a strong balletic technique to it, but it pulled in influences like break dancing and tap dancing and many other different forms, and we tried to kind of like mix it all together and see if we could blend it, which is kind of risky because usually it's like a terrible idea to do that, but I think it sort of worked with this piece, and so there's this duet. It's actually funny, there's this duet in the ballet that I made for my roommate from the school days, Robert Fairchild, and myself. And this was the reason why I wanted to do it, because I wanted to, when we were in the school together, we, in our dorm, we had Dance Dance Revolution. Do you know that game? It's like where you step on the arrows. And so we got obsessed with it, and we would play this game for like hours every night, to the point where we would wake up in the morning with shin splints and we wouldn't be able to go to class. And so it was just like this joyous moment, and we got super coordinated with it. And so when I was exploring this piece of music, like, cut to, I don't know how many years later, 10, 15 years later, we were doing this piece, I just really wanted to do kind of like an ode to that time. And so that's what this duet became. And so, yeah, you never know where the influence is going to come from. That's all.
How many rehearsals do you have with the full orchestra?
Oh, okay. Good question. People think we usually have more. People usually think we have a lot more for this. Yeah, it's usually like 2 rehearsals with the orchestra.
And that's more than a lot of companies. We have 4 goes on stage, techs and dressers, so 2 with the orchestra is still, I think, a bonus level.
Yeah, and even for the orchestra to rehearse a new piece of music, they'll rehearse it like maybe 2 more times. It's not like they're rehearsing it for weeks. It's like, I think because it's so expensive, they can only really do a couple of rehearsals.
But you don't have an orchestra for your ballet, so you just have the 2 pianos.
For this we have 2 pianists. So they've been able to come in a little bit for rehearsals, and we've had one of the pianists for the entire rehearsal process, and so she's been really influential in shaping the piece and the dynamics of the piece, and we've made little cuts and tweaks to the score through the process of creating the dance. So it's truly a dance score. Like by the time it premieres, it's not just like a written concert piece that we're then choreographing. It's constantly taking shape as we work in the studio with the dancers, and so that's a big part of creating this ballet.
And you had the 2 pianists today, though, right?
We did.
Was that the first time?
First time, yeah, that was great. They had to roll in another piano into the studio, so we'd have 2.
So one last question, before we finish.
I don't know how free you are to talk about the work you're doing for Westside Story since you're in production, but if you can talk about it, I'm just curious if you're going to be changing up these dance images that we're all so familiar with, and if you're changing the choreography and what it's like to do that for dance that we're all so familiar with.
Yeah, there's a lot of ghosts in that work. I can't talk too much about it, but because it's still very much in development, so I don't really have an answer for that. And we just barely started working on it. So, but I will say that it's a dream team of people to work with. It's obviously Steven Spielberg is directing it, but then also we have a script for the film by Tony Kushner, who is a phenomenal playwright who wrote Angels in America and among other things, and Janine Tesori is working on the vocals and the music, and she is an amazing theater composer who wrote shows like Fun Home and Caroline or Change and Thoroughly Modern Millie, and a great cast, a great group of actors and dancers and singers who, we auditioned in 4 cities, sometimes more than once, and so we saw thousands and thousands of people. It was one of the most exhausting processes to just get the film cast, and so now we're there, and so we're super stoked for it. What's that? No, the music's the original Bernstein piece. Yeah, so that's intact. Yeah. Finally filmed and out of the can? Do you mean like in theaters? I think it opens in the holiday season of 2020. Yeah.
So a big round of applause for Justin for joining us tonight.
Thanks.
In a few days, you'll get a chance to see his beautiful ballet, and it is smart and musical and really suits the company. I think that I was thrilled as soon as I saw it start to be rehearsed, because it is a ballet of now, and it is a ballet, in my opinion. It's hard to talk about yourself, but all those influences that you've just heard him talk about is all there in the work, and that's what makes it feel alive and special, and what suits the company upstairs so much. So thank you very much. And I hope to see you all in the next couple of weeks. Thank you.